Why do you always return to what destroys you? It's not weakness, it's not a lack of willpower, and it's definitely not bad luck. Carl Jung discovered something disturbing. Every addiction carries an encrypted message from your own soul, and you're ignoring it. While you fight against the behavior, the real battle is happening on a field you didn't even know existed. Your addiction isn't the problem. It's the symptom. It's the desperate alarm from a part of you that's been abandoned, rejected, locked in the basement of your psyche. And it will scream louder and louder until you finally stop and listen. In this video, you'll understand why your soul chose exactly this addiction for you, and how to decode the message that can free you once and for all. Brace yourself. What you're about to discover may completely change how you see yourself. There's a space inside you that nobody talks about. Not your family, not your friends, not even the therapists who charge $200 an hour. It's a hollow place that formed long before you picked up your first drink, your first cigarette, your first escape route. Jung called it the unlived life, the part of you that never got permission to exist. You were 5 years old when you learned that certain feelings weren't acceptable. Maybe anger made your parents uncomfortable, so you swallowed it. Maybe sadness was seen as weakness, so you buried it deep. Maybe your dreams were too big, too strange, too different from what your family expected, so you locked them away in a room you promised yourself you'd never open again. But here's what nobody tells you about locked rooms. They don't stay quiet. The things you refuse to feel don't disappear. They ferment, they grow, they become something darker and more demanding. Every time you pushed down an emotion, every time you said no to a desire that felt too dangerous, every time you chose safety over truth, that hollow space grew bigger. And bigger spaces need bigger fillers. This is where your soul started whispering, then speaking, then screaming, but you couldn't hear it over the noise of your daily life, over the expectations crushing you, over the person you were pretending to be. Your addiction didn't start with a substance or a behavior. It started with a rejection of self, when you were told, either through words or silence, that who you really are wasn't good enough, wasn't safe, wasn't acceptable. You made a choice. You chose survival over authenticity. You chose belonging over being. And in that moment, a void opened up inside you. Not a physical void, but a psychological and spiritual absence. The space where your true self should have lived became an empty room. And empty rooms have a way of attracting exactly the wrong tenants. Jung understood this better than almost anyone. He saw that people don't develop problems because they're weak or broken. They develop problems because they're strong enough to survive impossible situations. Your psyche is brilliant. When direct expression became too dangerous, it found indirect roots. When your real feelings couldn't be shown, it created symbols. When your authentic self couldn't breathe, it learned to whisper through symptoms. Your addiction is one of those whispers. It's your soul speaking in code, using the only language it has left. Think about the moment right before you reach for your vice. There's always a feeling there, isn't there? Not the craving itself, but something underneath. A flutter of anxiety, a wave of emptiness, a sudden sense that something is terribly, fundamentally wrong. That feeling is the void making itself known. It's the unlived life demanding attention. It's every suppressed emotion, every denied desire, every abandoned dream rising up all at once. And because you were never taught how to be with that feeling, because nobody ever showed you that voids can be explored rather than filled, you do the only thing that's ever worked. You reach for the thing that makes it stop. But here's the cruel joke. The relief is temporary, but the void is permanent. Or at least it feels that way, because every time you fill it with something external, you're confirming its message. You're agreeing that yes, there is something missing, and no, you can't provide it yourself. You need the substance, you need the behavior, you need something outside yourself to make you feel whole. This is the trap Jung warned about. The more you try to fill the void with external things, the bigger it grows. It's like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. The act of pouring actually enlarges the hole. Your soul knows this. Deep down, in a place beyond words and logic, you know this too. That's why the shame comes, not because you're weak, but because part of you recognizes the betrayal. Every time you choose the quick fix over the real work, every time you numb instead of feel, every time you run instead of turn toward yourself, you're abandoning that 5-year-old again. You're confirming that their feelings don't matter, that their truth is too dangerous, that who they really are must stay locked in that room forever. The addiction becomes a ritual of self-abandonment, repeated daily, sometimes hourly, until it's the only relationship you know how to have with yourself. Now that you understand the void exists, you need to know what lives in it. Jung had a name for this. He called it the shadow. Not evil, not bad, but everything you decided wasn't you. Every characteristic you rejected, every impulse you suppressed, every aspect of yourself you deemed unacceptable got thrown into the basement of your consciousness. And down there, in the dark, something interesting happens. These rejected parts don't die. They don't fade away. They organize. They gain power. They become autonomous. They start making decisions for you. Your shadow knows exactly which addiction will speak to your specific wound. This isn't random. The person who drowns themselves in work is running from a different demon than the person who loses themselves in substances. The one who can't stop scrolling is avoiding a different truth than the one who can't stop eating. Your particular vice is perfectly calibrated to your particular pain. It's a key that fits a very specific lock. Jung would say your shadow chose it deliberately, with surgical precision, because only that exact addiction could temporarily bridge the gap between who you pretend to be and who you really are. Consider what your addiction actually does for you. Not the surface story you tell yourself, but the deeper function. Does it make you feel powerful when you usually feel weak? Does it quiet a mind that never stops judging? Does it create connection when you normally feel isolated? Does it let you feel something, anything, when numbness has become your default? Whatever it provides, that's the clue to what's living in your shadow. That's the rejected part trying to come home. The workaholic isn't addicted to productivity. They're addicted to the feeling of worth that comes from achievement, because somewhere along the way, they learned that their inherent value wasn't enough. The substance user isn't addicted to the chemical. They're addicted to the brief moment when the war inside them stops, when all the contradictory parts finally go quiet. Your shadow contains everything you were told was wrong with you. If you grew up in a house where anger was forbidden, your shadow holds a rage that could move mountains. If you were taught that wanting things was selfish, your shadow contains desires so vast they terrify you. If you learned that vulnerability equals weakness, your shadow harbors a need for connection so deep it feels like drowning. These aren't flaws. They're power sources you've been taught to fear, and power that can't flow naturally will always find a way to leak out sideways. This is why fighting your addiction directly almost never works. You're not fighting the behavior. You're fighting a part of yourself that's trying to come home. Every time you white-knuckle through a craving, every time you use pure willpower to resist, you're essentially telling your shadow to stay in the basement. You're confirming that those parts of you are still unacceptable, still too dangerous, still need to be controlled and suppressed. And so the shadow gets more creative. It finds new ways to get your attention. The addiction morphs, shifts, transforms. You quit drinking and start overeating. You stop gambling and start obsessing over work. You give up one vice and immediately pick up another because you're treating symptoms while ignoring the disease. Jung said the shadow is 90% gold. All that rejected material, all those forbidden parts, they contain your greatest gifts. The anger you suppressed holds your power to set boundaries and fight for what matters. The sadness you buried holds your capacity for deep empathy and authentic connection. The desires you denied hold your passion and life force. Your shadow isn't the enemy. It's the treasure chest you've been sitting on while begging the universe for riches. But treasure chests locked in basements start to smell. They rot, they ferment, they become toxic. Not because the treasure itself is bad, but because anything locked away long enough in darkness becomes distorted. Your addiction is the smell leaking out. It's the shadow's way of saying, pay attention. Something down here needs light. Something down here is dying from neglect. The specific nature of your vice tells you exactly which part of your shadow is most desperate for integration. Are you addicted to chaos? Look for the part of you that was forced to be too controlled, too perfect, too good. Are you addicted to control? Look for the part of you that felt powerless, helpless, at the mercy of forces you couldn't manage. Your shadow will always use your addiction to show you the wound. The question is whether you're ready to stop treating the symptom and start healing the source. And to heal the root cause and delve even deeper, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. Every addiction has a rhythm, a sequence, a sacred order that must be followed. You might not think of it this way, but Jung would. He saw that humans are ritual creatures. We need ceremony, we need repetition, we need acts that connect us to something larger than our daily struggles. When we don't have healthy rituals, when we've lost connection to the sacred, we create our own. And often, these personal rituals look a lot like addictions. This is where your behavior stops being just a bad habit and becomes something far more complex. It becomes your religion. Think about the preparation. The addict doesn't just use, they prepare. They create conditions. They set the stage. There's a whole ceremony that happens before the substance or behavior ever appears. The alcoholic has their special glass, their favorite chair, their particular time of day. The gambler has their lucky routine, their superstitious gestures, their sacred space at the table or screen. The person addicted to their phone has specific triggers, certain apps they check in a certain order, a choreography they perform dozens of times per day. This isn't random. This is ritual. This is your psyche trying to create meaning in a life that feels meaningless. Jung understood that humans need transcendence. We need moments when we touch something beyond the ordinary, beyond the grinding mundanity of existence. In traditional societies, this need was met through genuine spiritual practice, through ceremonies that connected individuals to their community and to forces greater than themselves. But modern life has stripped away most of these structures. We're told to be rational, practical, productive. We're taught that mystery is superstition and that anything we can't measure doesn't matter. And so the soul, desperate for its dose of the sacred, creates counterfeit transcendence. It builds rituals around the only reliable escape it can find. Your addiction serves this function. In those moments of use, of engagement, of total absorption in your vice, you experience something that feels almost holy. Time disappears. The constant chatter of your mind goes quiet. The weight of being you lifts just for a little while. You enter an altered state, a different realm where the normal rules don't apply. This is what you're actually addicted to. Not the substance, not the behavior, but the transcendence. The temporary exit from a self that feels like a prison. The brief communion with something beyond your everyday suffering. But here's what makes this so devastating. Real ritual connects you to yourself and others. Real ceremony integrates you, makes you more whole. Your addiction ritual does the opposite. It fragments you further. Every time you perform your secret ceremony, you're actually disconnecting more deeply. You're choosing isolation over community. You're choosing numbness over feeling. You're choosing a false transcendence that leaves you more trapped than before. It's a ritual of severance disguised as a ritual of connection. And your soul knows the difference. That's where the shame comes from. Not from moral failure, but from spiritual betrayal. The timing of your rituals matters too. Most addictions intensify at specific times. End of the workday, late at night, weekends, moments of transition. These aren't accidents. These are the times when the structure of your day falls away and you're left alone with yourself. These are the thresholds, the liminal spaces where you have to face the question of who you are when nobody's watching. Traditional cultures understood thresholds as sacred and dangerous. They created specific rituals for these moments because they knew that without guidance, people get lost in the spaces between. Your addiction is what you do to get through these thresholds without having to feel their full weight. Pay attention to what comes right before your ritual begins. There's always a trigger, but not the kind you've been taught to look for. It's not just stress or boredom. It's a spiritual crisis. It's the moment when you brush up against your own emptiness, your own mortality, your own insignificance in the vast machinery of existence. It's the moment when the question arises, what's the point of any of this? And because you don't have a genuine answer, because nobody taught you how to hold that question with grace, you reach for your ritual. You perform your ceremony. You create your moment of false transcendence. And for a little while, the question goes away. Jung would say you're not sick. You're trying to cure yourself with the wrong medicine. Your soul needs ritual, needs ceremony, needs connection to the sacred, but it needs the real thing, not the substitute. The tragedy of addiction is that it mimics exactly what you need while delivering the opposite. It promises transcendence, but brings more imprisonment. It promises connection, but delivers deeper isolation. It promises relief, but compounds your suffering. Your ritual isn't the problem. The fact that you need ritual is actually healthy. The problem is that you're performing a ceremony that disconnects you from your own soul instead of connecting you to it. Here's what makes addiction truly maddening. It never works. Not really. Not for long. You know this. Every single time you indulge, there's a voice in your head saying this time will be different. This time will finally satisfy. This time will be enough. And every single time, within minutes or hours, you're empty again. Hungrier than before, needing more. The satisfaction you're chasing is always just out of reach. Always in the next hit, the next drink, the next scroll, the next game. You're pursuing something that by its very nature cannot be caught. Jung called this the infinite hunger, and he knew it was the soul's way of telling you that you're feeding the wrong appetite. What are you actually hungry for? Not the surface answer, not the thing your addiction pretends to provide. Go deeper. Beneath the craving for the substance or behavior is a craving for something else entirely. You're hungry for a version of yourself that you've never been allowed to be. You're hungry for a life that feels real instead of performed. You're hungry for connection that doesn't require you to hide who you are. You're hungry for meaning in a world that keeps telling you meaning is an illusion. You're hungry for your own soul, and you're trying to satisfy that hunger with things that have nothing to do with it. This is the cruelest aspect of addiction. It hijacks your legitimate needs and redirects them toward false solutions. Your need for transcendence gets funneled into substances that alter your consciousness temporarily, but leave you more disconnected afterward. Your need for community gets redirected into behaviors that isolate you. Your need for authenticity gets twisted into performances that make you feel more fake. The hunger is real, the hunger is valid, the hunger is actually healthy. But you've been tricked into believing that external things can satisfy internal needs. And so you keep eating food that provides no nutrition, keep drinking water that increases your thirst, keep reaching for solutions that perpetuate the problem. Jung observed that the soul speaks in symbols. When it can't get what it needs directly, it creates metaphors. Your addiction is a metaphor. It's your psyche saying, I need something, I'm starving for something, and since I can't have the real thing, I'll take this substitute. The person who can't stop accumulating money isn't hungry for wealth. They're hungry for security, for proof of worth, for protection against the vulnerability they felt as children. The person who can't stop seeking sexual conquests isn't hungry for sex. They're hungry for validation, for proof they're desirable, for temporary relief from the shame they carry about their own bodies and desires. Whatever you're addicted to, it's a stand-in for something else, a poor translation of a need your soul can't express any other way. The hungrier you get, the more you consume, and the more you consume, the hungrier you become. This isn't willpower failure. This is the natural consequence of trying to satisfy a spiritual need with a material solution. It's like being thirsty and drinking salt water. The act of drinking makes the thirst worse, but your body keeps insisting that drinking is the answer, because drinking is what you do when you're thirsty. Your psyche is stuck in the same loop. It knows you need something desperately, and it knows that your addiction provided temporary relief once upon a time, so it keeps driving you back to the same well, even though that well has been dry for years. There's a moment right after you indulge when the truth becomes clear. The fog lifts for a second, and you see exactly how empty you still are, how nothing has changed, how the problem you were trying to solve is still there, often bigger than before. That moment is pure agony, not because of the behavior itself, but because of the recognition. You were chasing satisfaction, and you caught emptiness instead. Again, for the 1,000th time. This is the moment when most people double down. They reach for more, hoping that quantity will make up for quality. 2 drinks instead of 1, 3 hours online instead of 2. 1 more bet, 1 more purchase, 1 more hit. Surely if you just increase the dose, you'll finally reach that place of satisfaction. But you won't, because you can't, because you're using the wrong medicine for your disease. The hunger that drives addiction is actually a gift, though it doesn't feel like one. It's your soul refusing to settle. It's the part of you that knows you're meant for more than this, that won't let you fully resign yourself to a half-lived life. The hunger says there's something missing, and it's right. Something is missing. Not out there in the world, but in here. The missing piece is you, the real you, the you that got locked away, the you that your addiction is a poor substitute for. Your hunger isn't the enemy, it's the compass. It's pointing toward what you actually need. You've just been walking in the wrong direction. Jung believed that psychological suffering isn't random punishment. It's purposeful. It's the psyche's way of forcing growth, demanding integration, insisting that you become whole. From this perspective, your addiction isn't a failure, it's a test. Not in the sense of pass or fail, but in the sense of an ordeal that reveals who you really are. Every time you face your craving, every time you feel that pull toward your vice, you're standing at a crossroads. One path leads back to fragmentation, to staying split, to continuing the pattern of self-abandonment you learned so long ago. The other path leads toward integration, toward wholeness, toward finally bringing all your scattered pieces back together. Most people don't realize they're fragmented. They go through life thinking of themselves as a single, unified person. But Jung saw through this illusion. He recognized that human beings are more like committees than individuals. We contain multitudes, we house contradictions. Part of you wants to quit your addiction desperately. Another part of you would die to protect it. Part of you knows you're destroying yourself. Another part believes you need this to survive. These aren't different moods or conflicting thoughts. They're different selves, different aspects of your psyche that want fundamentally different things, and they're at war. Your addiction lives in this war zone. It thrives on your internal division. Every fragment of yourself that you've rejected, every piece you've disowned, every aspect you've labeled as not me, has to go somewhere. And where it goes is into your shadow, where it gains its own agency, its own desires, its own methods of getting what it needs. Your addiction is often the voice of these rejected fragments making their demands. They can't speak directly because you won't listen. So they speak through compulsion, through craving, through behaviors you can't seem to control. They hijack your will because their will was never acknowledged in the first place. The test isn't whether you can stop the behavior through force. You probably can, at least temporarily. People white-knuckle their way through addictions all the time. But that's not integration. That's just replacing one prison with another. The real test is whether you can turn toward all the parts of yourself you've been running from. Whether you can make room for the anger you were told was ugly, whether you can acknowledge the needs you were taught were selfish, whether you can accept the parts of your nature that don't fit the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. This is terrifying. These parts were rejected for a reason, usually because accepting them meant risking rejection from people you needed to survive. But here's what happens when you start bringing the fragments back. When you stop fighting your shadow and start listening to it instead. When you make space for all the contradictions and complications that make you human, the addiction starts to lose its power. Not because you're being strong or disciplined, but because the internal war is ending. The fragments that were screaming through compulsive behavior finally have another way to be heard. The energy that was locked up in maintaining your defenses, in keeping certain parts of yourself suppressed, becomes available for other things, for life, for growth, for actual satisfaction instead of temporary relief. Jung was clear about this. Integration doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means becoming whole. It means accepting that you contain light and dark, strength and weakness, wisdom and foolishness. It means recognizing that the parts of you that seemed most shameful often hold your greatest gifts. Your sensitivity that was mocked might be your superpower for understanding others. Your anger that was condemned might be your capacity to fight for justice. Your desires that were shamed might be your connection to life force and vitality. Nothing human is foreign to you. Everything you see in others, every quality you judge or admire, exists somewhere in your own psyche. The question is whether you can make room for all of it. The test of addiction is ultimately a test of self-acceptance. Can you look at the parts of yourself you've spent decades hiding and say, "You belong to me too"? Can you face the impulses you've labeled as disgusting, the needs you've dismissed as weak, the aspects of your nature you've worked so hard to overcome? Can you stop trying to be better and start trying to be whole? This doesn't mean indulging every impulse or excusing harmful behavior. It means acknowledging what's true. It means bringing everything into consciousness where it can be worked with, integrated, transformed. What you resist persists. What you face dissolves. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. Your addiction will keep testing you until you pass. And passing doesn't mean never craving again. It means developing a different relationship with the craving, seeing it as information instead of enemy. Asking what part of you is speaking, what need is trying to express itself, what fragment is demanding integration. The urge to use becomes a doorway instead of a dead end, a signal that something needs attention, a reminder that you're still not fully home to yourself. The test never really ends because growth never ends. But the nature of the struggle changes completely when you stop fighting yourself and start fighting for yourself instead. So how do you actually do this? How do you move from addiction to integration? Jung's answer might surprise you. You don't kill the addiction. You don't overcome it through force. You transform it by understanding what it's trying to give you and finding authentic ways to meet that need. This is liberation, not freedom from desire, but freedom to desire what actually serves your wholeness. Not the absence of hunger, but the ability to feed yourself real food instead of poison disguised as nourishment. Integration starts with a radical act. You stop treating your addiction as the enemy. This doesn't mean you celebrate it or indulge it mindlessly. It means you get curious about it. You approach it the way Jung would, as a symptom carrying valuable information. Every time the craving arises, instead of immediately fighting it or giving in to it, you pause. You create space between impulse and action. In that space, you ask the question Jung would ask, what part of me is speaking right now? What does this fragment need? What's the real hunger beneath the surface craving? This simple act of inquiry begins to shift something fundamental. You're no longer at war with yourself. You're becoming an investigator of your own psyche. As you investigate, patterns emerge. You start to notice that your addiction spikes at specific times in response to specific triggers. But these triggers aren't random. They're connected to old wounds, ancient fears, unmet needs from childhood. Maybe you reach for your vice every time you feel inadequate because adequacy was the currency of love in your family. Maybe you use every time you feel invisible because visibility felt dangerous growing up. Maybe you indulge every time you feel trapped because freedom was taken from you early and often. The addiction is speaking the language of your history. Once you learn to translate, once you understand what it's really saying, you can start to respond differently. Here's where the real work begins. For each need your addiction was trying to meet, you have to find authentic ways to meet it yourself. If your vice was giving you permission to feel powerful, you need to find real sources of power. Not power over others, but power in yourself. The ability to set boundaries, to say no, to take up space, to advocate for what matters. If your addiction was numbing pain, you need to develop capacity to feel pain without it destroying you, to sit with discomfort, to let emotions move through you, to trust that feelings pass even when they feel eternal. If your behavior was creating false connection, you need to risk real connection. To show up authentically, to be seen in your imperfection, to let others meet the real you instead of the performed version. This is harder than staying addicted. Much harder. Because staying addicted, despite all its suffering, is familiar. It's a known quantity. You understand that pain. But growth means walking into uncertainty. It means developing new capacities you don't yet have. It means being vulnerable in ways that terrify you. It means facing all the reasons you built your defenses in the first place. The people who successfully integrate their addictions don't do it because they're stronger. They do it because they become willing to be weak, to not know, to fall apart, to let the old structure crumble so something new can be built. Jung talked about the transcendent function, the psyche's natural drive toward wholeness. This function is always working in you, even when you can't feel it. It's the force that brings dreams, that creates symptoms, that won't let you settle for a half-life. Your addiction is actually an expression of this function, though a distorted one. It's your psyche trying to make you whole through the only means it has available. When you start working consciously with this drive, when you align yourself with the movement toward integration instead of fighting it, everything changes. The work is still hard, but it stops feeling like you're pushing a boulder uphill. You're flowing with something larger than yourself. Integration isn't a destination, it's a practice. Every day you'll face moments when the old patterns call to you, when the addiction whispers its familiar promises, when the easy route looks so much more appealing than the honest one. These moments are your opportunity. Not to prove how strong you are, but to practice choosing wholeness over fragmentation. To notice the craving, honor what it's trying to tell you, and respond to the real need instead of the false solution. Some days you'll succeed, some days you'll fail. Both are part of the process. The point isn't perfection, the point is direction. Are you moving toward yourself or away from yourself? Are you bringing more of you into consciousness or pushing more of you into shadow? The greatest irony of this whole journey is that liberation comes through acceptance, not rejection. You've been trying to reject your addiction, reject your cravings, reject the parts of yourself that seem weak or wrong or shameful. And that rejection is what keeps you trapped. True freedom comes when you can turn toward all of it. when you can say yes to the whole catastrophe of being human, when you can hold your light and your darkness with equal tenderness. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Not becoming somebody else, becoming more fully who you already are. Gathering all your scattered pieces, even the ones you thought were too damaged or ugly to keep, and weaving them into something whole. Your addiction was never your greatest weakness. It was always your soul's desperate attempt to make you pay attention, to force you to look at what you've been avoiding, to push you toward the very integration you've been resisting. The test against your soul isn't whether you can white-knuckle your way to sobriety. It's whether you can love yourself enough to become whole, whether you can stop abandoning yourself and finally come home, whether you can transform your oldest wound into your greatest wisdom. This is the liberation Jung promised. Not freedom from struggle, but freedom to struggle towards something that matters. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. Not the end of your story, but the beginning of your real life.